Tonight on CTV News, 2 Christchurch police officers attacked at a shopping mall. What's that stink in Bromley? And it's been described as a dump, but is there hope for New Brighton?
Broadcasting across Canterbury, from the CTV studio, this is First at 5.
Good evening, welcome to CTV News, now streaming live every night at ctv.co.nz. A man charged with domestic violence now faces additional assault charges on police after attacking 2 officers who tried to arrest him at a shopping mall car park.
2 police officers are still recovering after being assaulted by a man who fled from a domestic violence incident. 29-year-old builder Tiataway Floyd Meechang has been charged with resisting arrest, intentionally injuring a policeman, stealing a woman's clothing, intentionally damaging a television and driving while disqualified. He will face court again in late July. The 2 officers attended a call-out to a North Brighton residence about 9 p.m. last night for a domestic assault incident. Police say Meechang had fled from the house, with the officers finding him at the Palms Shopping Centre car park shortly after. Upon trying to arrest the man, the officers were assaulted, suffering head injuries. The 2 were treated by medical staff, however they have been assessed as not requiring ongoing medical assistance. Police say the victim of the domestic incident was not injured.
The Green Party's packed a sad over the government's investment in roads for Christchurch. The party says the money would be better spent on public transport. Here's Jared McCulloch.
More funding needs to go into Christchurch's public transport. That's the message from the Green Party following the government's commitment to new roading and transport systems. Over $1.5 billion from the Land Transport Fund will be spent in the city over the next 3 years, developing more motorways and some funding for public transport to help with the continued traffic congestion. However, Green List MP Eugenie Sage says the new money for public transport is not enough.
We're seeing $859 million being spent on the Christchurch motorway program and new roads there, and yet only $137 million being spent on public transport.
She says more money needs to be committed to bus and rail networks, which will help with the traffic woes around the city. The fund will also be made up from the ratepayers to complete the roading projects, but the main focus should be on reducing more carbon emissions into the air, saying this will not help.
Well, Canterbury's getting about 18% of the government's transport spending, but once again the spending is targeted primarily to pollution-causing motorways. There should be a much greater spend on public transport. Particularly in Christchurch, the roads are really congested and the government has dropped the ball in terms of assisting with public transport.
Just recently, the Christchurch City Council axed plans to a joint congestion relief project to try and ease parts of Cranford Street to make it 4 lanes. Also axed was a $50 million project to extend Christchurch's northern motorway. That's where Sage says trains could help with the northern traffic.
There needs to be some more feasibility work done there, but it's certainly something that's been suggested for the northern arterial route, and we need to get more people on buses in the shorter term and have many more busways so that people can get around the city quickly.
However, they've been committed to cycle networks, and so has the government.
It's great, but the whole priority of the National Land Transport Program needs to change so that we're not increasing pollution, we're actually getting people on bikes, walking and on public transport.
The Green Party says the amount of commitment to buses and other ways of travelling in, out and around the city is pathetic compared to the country's 2 other major centres, Auckland and Wellington. However, she says there needs to be a focus on other ways of getting around.
Throwing billions at state highways and new motorways with very poor business cases. They only carry a small proportion of freight and traffic, and yet KiwiRail has got to go to Treasury and beg for a few $100 million every year to keep our rail network operating.
And although they want more buses to be on the local roads, the party has previously wanted to extend the use of public transport further by offering tertiary students free off-peak travel and to create a transport body to be known as Canterbury Transport. Works will begin and extend until 2018 with the new roading projects, but for now public transport will have to stay in the slow lane. Jared McCulloch, CTV News.
A man who sexually attacked a woman at Christchurch Hospital faces a lengthy sentence. The 39-year-old exposed himself to one woman and then assaulted another with the intent to cause sexual violation.
A man who opportunistically assaulted one hospital patient and exposed himself to another has been jailed for 3.5 years. Following the sentencing today, the judge at the Christchurch District Court recommended that the 39-year-old Jared Rees-Taylor undergo intense psychological treatment while in prison. The court heard that in January, Taylor had gone to the Christchurch Hospital to collect cigarette butts and had become aroused at the sight of women. He then exposed himself to one woman at the hospital and then assaulted another by grabbing her, putting one arm around her stomach and hand over the mouth. Taylor later told police he was sexually frustrated and wanted to have sex with the women by raping or sexually abusing them, but they had fought him off. The court heard that Taylor had suffered physical and emotional abuse during a deprived childhood, was a diagnosed schizophrenic with a delusional belief system, and had a history of substance and alcohol abuse. At the time of the attack, he was being moved from hospital care into a halfway house. He was drunk at the time of the attack. The victim impact reports stated the women are now hypervigilant on their visits to the hospital.
Some Christchurch residents are fed up living in a stinky neighbourhood. The odour from the local tip, the waste treatment centre and even the compost operation is proving just too much to handle. And now residents in Bromley are taking to pen and paper to voice their anger.
25 residents from Bromley, Linwood and Woolston have banded together to protest against the reeking odours they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. The Hagley Ferrymead Community Board held a meeting last night and sought out information about what types of odours can be smelt and the impact on families in the area.
There are areas within Bromley and Woolston that are industrial areas, but the odours do travel into the residential areas, and consents don't allow for that. Any offensive odours are supposed to stay on site.
Acting as advocates for the community, the board held the meeting to gain as much information as they could before they can figure out their next step.
We've been aware that there have been some complaints over the last few years to ECAN about smells in the area, so we wanted to gauge the extent of the problem in the wider community, and got some really good information from people last night.
Residents have been encouraged to keep an odour diary to try and pinpoint the cause of the bad smell.
The most common one was the strong composting smell from the Living Earth plant, but people were also had concerns about sometimes in Woolston from geleta, sometimes the estuary smells that you get with the sea lettuce and those kind of things, and also sometimes people were smelling various food smells, but also some from the sewage treatment plant.
She says that the impacts on families are more than just dealing with a bit of a pongy smell.
So there were things like people having to stay inside with the windows and doors shut, and people who had hung their washing out to dry and then had to re-wash it because the washing itself smelled, those kind of things. And so I think it's quite useful for those organisations to be able to hear from the wider community about that.
We visited the Living Earth plant in May this year and spoke to Christchurch branch manager Daniel O'Connell about exactly how much compost they see through the plant.
Almost 46,000 tonne of curbside collection each year, and we turn that into about 25,000 tonnes of compost.
Living Earth had a representative attend last night's community board hearing and said that they are aware of the situation. They are not able to make a comment at this time. Chelsea Daniels, CTV News.
And still to come here on CTV News, are you off the booze this month? If you're not, well, we'll tell you why perhaps you should be, and what next for New Brighton. Welcome back to CTV News, streaming live at ctv.co.nz. So, could you do it? Could you have no alcohol for 1 month? Yes, it's hard to believe, but Dry July is back again. But one health advocate says it's all about moderation that works best. Here's Chelsea Daniels.
It's the beginning of a new month and the beginning of a new challenge for thousands of New Zealanders for Dry July. The money raised from Dry July participants goes towards projects that directly benefit the well-being of adults living with cancer. Doug Selman of the National Addiction Centre says that our favourite recreational drug is a lot more dangerous than we think.
Most people now know that tobacco causes cancer. Very relatively few New Zealanders are aware of that linkage that alcohol causes cancer.
Film companies in the US have adopted a no-smoking policy in movies that may be watched by children, and Doug says that alcohol should be treated the same.
Certainly regular heavy or binge drinking, there are programs which actually glorify and help to normalise our heavy drinking culture. I think that those should be banned.
Studies from the University of Auckland suggest that 1 in 3 children between the ages of 12 and 16 have been involved in binge drinking. He says that over the last 15 years there has been a dramatic increase in the way alcohol companies have marketed towards young adolescents and women.
This was because per capita consumption in New Zealand was falling, and I think the industry were losing profit, so they opened up new markets. The men's drinking was relatively saturated, although there are always opportunities that the alcohol industry finds, even for men, to increase their drinking. But for women and young people, it was a wonderful new market for them.
Doug supports the Dry July campaign but doesn't believe it's enough to change the heavy drinking culture in New Zealand.
If people think that it would be impossible or it would be really uncomfortable or that it would be a real negative in some way to go a whole month without drinking alcohol, then it shows just how normalised alcohol is in that person's life.
In future, he hopes for a reform on the 5 major areas associated with alcohol-related problems, pinpointed by the World Health Organization. These are marketing, pricing, accessibility, age of purchase and drink driving.
The government needs to do something. And at the current time, we don't have a government that's in any way bold enough to do some things in that area. And until they are, it's very hard to take them seriously if they're saying that they want to do something about the heavy drinking culture.
Last year, those who ditched the booze raised over $744,000 for 3 beneficiary cancer services around the country. Chelsea Daniels, CTV News.
Today, Waimatī and Ashburton became the final Canterbury districts to enact their long-term plans, and perhaps it comes as no surprise roads are the focus.
Long-term plan season continues, with the Ashburton and Waimatī District Councils adopting their latest 10-year plans today. And similar to its Selwyn neighbour, Ashburton's forecast growth will have the district spending more on roading, along with improved wastewater and sewer works. Probably unsurprisingly, after the cost blowout of the Ashburton Art Gallery and Heritage Centre, the council says its long-term plan decisions have followed a more conservative approach. And it says the town agrees, with many of the 356 public submissions calling for consolidation of assets rather than big growth plans. However, this stance hasn't sat well with some residents, upset about the axing of 2 hydrosites at the town's new EA Network Centre. The council says this would have cost ratepayers about $1.3 million if the community had raised the same amount through fundraising. It says the majority of submissions on this proposal were not in favour of it. A $1.5 million grant for a combined clubrooms and indoor sports facility in Rakaia was also canned. Down in Waimatī, rate rises are on average increasing by 3%, with roading also a priority for the district in the next 10 years. It had projected a nearly 6% average increase, but the council says, for the time being, it will have to hold off on some roading activities until the NZTA provides more of its planned funding. The council also approved the creation of 2 rural rating zones and created the Waimatī Town Business Area for rating purposes.
He voted against the city's 10-year plan, but New Brighton councillor Glenn Livingston says he's confident investment in the rundown seaside suburb is still on track. Here's Jared McCulloch.
It's a promising sign ahead for the eastern community of Christchurch. Last Friday, when the long-term plan was given the tick of approval for the next 10 years, Glenn Livingston was against the idea of selling assets, urging the council to think again on the proposal to get them back in the black.
In the face of factual evidence, the will of our community by 4 to 1, 83%, The sense of loss of control over its assets is noted in the agenda. This council still chooses to ignore that. On that basis, I cannot support this recommendation.
However, he says although the council's long-term plan has gone through, he's happy that projects focused in New Brighton are ready to start.
Pretty happy. I think that in what we do with New Brighton, for instance, that you not only need to ensure that there's sufficient or even more than sufficient budget allocation.
And he says there's a sign of hope to rejuvenate the suburb in desperate need of help, saying it's coming.
It's a stepping stone because along with this we've approved the Development Authority Development Christchurch to be inaugurated, and what I'm hoping with that is New Brighton, along with perhaps say Littleton, will be one of the first cabs off the rank to actually get projects underway.
But as the long-term plan went through, with councillors voting 8-6 in favour of the 10-year document, the following areas of New Brighton will be focused on. The Christchurch City Council will bump up the budget for the suburb's rejuvenation program, adding an extra $3 million to both the New Brighton Legacy program and the Suburban Master Plan. That's on top of the $5 million already in the pot. The proposed North Beach Promenade has also been taken a step further, with the local body wanting to find out more on the feasibility of the project, with an independent report due by the end of November this year.
So the same residents who want the promenade will also want good coastal protection in the form of the sandhills, and I know that a lot of those supporting the promenade want that too. It's not an either or, so it's how to do it. So that's what the feasibility will come down to, and that will take into account the critical environmental factors.
Another area is the Rafiti Golf Course, with the Christchurch City Council looking to sign an agreement for management rights so it can still be open to the public.
I think really great, and if Rafiti can run that themselves as proposed, that's really good. We did hear one submitter talk about the redevelopment of the whole park. I think it'd be good to join those up as well, so that you don't just get something up and running as a going concern thinking, right, it's fixed. You actually take it further than that and make sure it's regenerated for the future.
And the South Brighton Holiday Park will be on hold a bit longer as discussions continue.
We have some big considerations. We've got the natural hazards and we've got people living there, and an amenity for the east for people to go to. So I think we can come up with something there.
But Livingston says he's reasonably happy about the next steps for the east.
I'm fairly happy with what's been proposed. I think maybe people had expectations that it'd be a lot greater. But, all things aside, New Brighton has ended up with more additional funding than some other places got.
Time will tell for the suburb's future to bring it back to life. Jared McCulloch, CTV News.
An extension has been given to frustrated policyholders still unsure if they'll join group court action against insurer Southern Response. The class action set up to take on the government-owned insurance company has given claimants another 10 days to consider whether they'd like to sign up. A meeting was held several weeks ago with lawyer Grant Cameron informing those still unsure about taking on the insurer to make another decision. Since then, an email has been sent to Southern Response customers to take up a 2-hour free advice meeting to discuss their claims with the insurer, with more time given for policyholders to consider their options. The new deadline's now been pushed out to July the 10th. Still to come here on CTV News, the all-important weather forecast. And welcome back to CTV News. It could save North Canterbury farmers from future drought. And the company behind the Wayhi Irrigation scheme says it's only a few steps away from getting the green light.
North Canterbury farmers are confident a new $10 million irrigation scheme will soon be given the tick of approval. Stage 1 of the Wayhi Irrigation scheme, planned for the Warden area, is in the final stages of getting 9 consents from the Environment Court. The development company Huranui Water Project says it's now unlikely to be roadblocked after 2 appeals were successfully mediated in February this year. 190 farmer shareholders have invested $10 million into the scheme, which will initially see irrigation for about 12,000 hectares of farmland, much of which is struggling after this year's prolonged drought. The company says the plan will also provide nearly 700 jobs and boost the regional economy by $100 million. To date, the scheme is 13 years in the making, and there are plans too to extend other areas around the region and also the length of the upper Waihi River. If this goes ahead, the company expects to irrigate nearly 60,000 hectares of land, provide 3,400 jobs and boost the district's economy by nearly $500 million. However, opponents of the scheme, including the Green Party, say increased irrigation threatens water quality in the district in an area where improvements in drinking water standards were needed.
And now Mercy is at the weather screen with the very latest weather forecast.
Kia ora Canterbury. Well, the weather was a lot calmer for most places today. However, we are expecting those northwesterlies to come gusting through tomorrow. Let's take a look at today's highs. Twizel and Timaru, 10 degrees for you. Temuka and Geraldine, 15 degrees. Heading to mid-Canterbury, Christchurch on 11 degrees. A little bit warmer for Darfield, Leeston and Methven on 13 though. Akaroa warmer still on 14. Up to North Canterbury, Kaikoura on 12 degrees, 14 for Amberley, Calverton and Oxford, 13 degrees for Hanmer Springs and Rangiora. Let's take a look at the Alpine region now, 10 degrees for everyone here today. Taking a look at tomorrow's weathers for the major centres. Timaru, northwesterly winds coming through for Timaru tomorrow with sunshine. 10 degrees is your high and 1 for your morning. Not too bad, could be in the minuses. Looking to Ashburton, we're seeing a similar picture with these northwesterlies. However, we are seeing a few cloudy patches here and there. Over to the Garden City now. Sunshine for you tomorrow with northwesterlies coming through. Could be gusty at times and 10 degrees is your high. Over to Kaikoura, a very similar picture with 10 degrees and sunshine for you, 1 for your morning as well. Taking a look at other areas for tomorrow's temperatures, Twizel and Temuka, Geraldine and Waimate all on 10 degrees with northwesterly winds. Up to mid-Canterbury, a similar picture, 10 degrees for all the places here, 12 degrees though slightly warmer for Akaroa and northwesterly winds coming through for everyone. As we head to North Canterbury, everyone else is also following suit with this 10 degrees, sunshine for everywhere here as well, and 1 for your mornings. Looking to the Alpine region, surprise, surprise, 10 degrees for everyone here. Taking a look at the upcoming days now. Friday, we're actually seeing a southwesterly change for Friday evening. Should be fine during the day though. We're seeing 12 degrees for Kaikoura, you're the warmest place on Friday. Looking to Saturday, early teens coming through here, light winds for most places, few northwesterlies for Ashburton, sunshine as well, making for quite a good Saturday. Looking to the upcoming days for all of the areas, southwesterly winds and a southwesterly change for most of South Canterbury and heading up to North Canterbury as well. Watch that rain in the evening. Looking to Saturday's weather now, we're seeing a nice Saturday with a few cloudy patches here and there, but mostly dry and fine. You might even get your washing dry. As we can see over the next couple of days, those northwesterlies are expected to come back, but do enjoy the warmer weather while it lasts, as we are expecting a cold snap coming next week. That's your weather update for Wednesday.
And that is nearly CTV News for this Wednesday. But before we go, if you've got a great news story you think we need to know about, get in touch with us here at CTV. The email address is just news@ctv.co.nz. And don't forget, we stream live every evening at ctv.co.nz. Well, before we go, we leave you tonight with some imagery of the recently demolished police building. Have a great evening.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.